USA Warrior Stories is a not-for-profit organization designed to record, archive, and share videos of veteran stories, to help veterans make a connection with one another and to help us all better understand their sacrifices for our freedoms.
I joined the Marines a month after my 18th birthday. My father was a Marine sergeant and flamethrower in the Korean War, served with the 1st Marine Division. And I think he inspired my brother and I have an older brother and I have a younger sister, and he inspired my brother and I to serve in the military. And it almost was like a rite of passage to serve. My first year in college, and that's why I met the recruiter, and I said, my dad served, and he recommended I check this out, and I said I want to learn about enlisting, and then I want to learn about the officer program. And so the recruiter encouraged me. He said, you can enlist and go to boot camp, or you can enlist and swear in, and then we can send you to platoon leaders class. And so I opted for that. So I think I appreciated that advice.
We take college students after generally their freshman or their sophomore year, bring them down to officer candidate school for 6 weeks, and it's a chance for us to screen and evaluate their leadership potential.
So I went that summer of 1979 to Camp Upshur outside of Quantico, and then upon graduation from college and earning my degree, I was commissioned as second lieutenant in 1982. And then from there, I went on active duty, and I was assigned to Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, following the basic school in Quantico, where all officers go for basic, infantry training. Went on to my follow-on MOS school in communications. Communications officers get assigned to the air wing, to base, or to the infantry, and I got assigned to the infantry, which I absolutely loved. And so I was serving as the assistant regimental comm officer for 8th Marines, and we conducted the combined arms exercises out in Camp 29 Palms, California. We were doing a lot of that training. I had a platoon, and shortly after I joined 8th Marines, I was pending assignment to 1/8, who were currently deployed in Beirut, Lebanon. In fact, I was working with a new major who was my running partner and mentor, and he was going to become my boss, and we were to transition and do a turnover with the leadership of 1/8 in Beirut. And he went ahead of me, got there about 30 days into the country when the Beirut blast occurred. And on 23 October 1983, 241 Marines and sailors were killed in that blast. And I was not in the blast, I was a replacement. And when I replaced Lieutenant Joe Bocci, we had communicated back and forth on our turnover, and I was excited to take the new position and a little nervous, but he was crushing the blast. And so I want to recognize and just remember and say his name. He's a hero to me. There was a major who was with me at 8th Marines who was going to become the S3 officer for 1st Battalion 8th Marines. And as it turns out, he was crushed in the blast. And ones that survived the blast were at the Camp Lejeune Hospital, and then, recovering and returning to duty. And so I needed to figure out how to work with the Marines who'd been wounded and dealing with the traumatic event, and then the flood of parents who had just lost their sons in the blast, and how to deal with grieving parents, which I had no experience. And so I was overwhelmed by that, quite candidly. Following my tour with 1st Battalion 8th Marines, after my initial period as an officer, I got out as a 1st lieutenant and joined the reserves and joined corporate America and started building my own career in business. Then I earned my infantry officer MOS of 0302 by serving with 2nd Battalion 24th Marines. I was an infantry platoon commander, and I got a chance to go through the whole cold weather training cycle, where we trained in Fort McCoy, Wisconsin, and then we deployed out to Bridgeport, California, and did all the mountain warfare and cold weather training, and then we deployed, and I went with the advanced party, but we spent over 30 days north of the Arctic Circle in Norway, and we trained with the British Royal Marines, force on force, and what an experience. I mean, we lived outside. It was 0 degrees below zero, and we just adapted to the cold, lived in the snow. And then I got a job transfer to Phoenix, Arizona, and that was the time that Desert Storm was kicking off. And I went down and volunteered with the 6th Engineer Support Battalion, a reserve engineer battalion, We deployed to the port of Jubail in Saudi Arabia in December of 1990. And then because of my background, I was transferred to a 7th Engineer Support Battalion, which is an active duty engineer battalion on the border. Because during that time, our role, preparing for the ground war, our mission was to breach the minefields during the ground attack and worked along the border from Camp Mashab all the way west to Camp Kanjar. And over a 2-month period, we basically trained, dug in, and got ready for the ground attack. And we were told that we'd have high casualties. We would be attacked with nerve agent and anthrax, and then we'd have to decontaminate once we got across the border. And that these were fierce fighters that we were up against. And so that was the build-up and the context. We deployed all the way through. We navigated the first defensive belt, which was anti-tank, and then the second obstacle belt, which was anti-personnel. But we breached, participated in the breach, and then our objective was to secure Al Jaber airstrip. It didn't come without casualties. We had few casualties, but in our battalion, we lost Lance Corporal John Waldron on 26 February. And in his particular situation, the Iraqis were engaging on fire with the lead Amtrak that he was standing next to. The Amtrak pivoted and killed him. When we concluded combat operations and started retrograding out of Kuwait, battalion commander stopped the whole unit in the middle of the desert in the wind. We set up and with the chaplain, and we had a memorial service for Lance Corporal John Waldron. And it just stuck in my mind. And I felt that he was a Marine in our unit, and I need to think about him, his family, and his name, and to say his name. And so I haven't given up his name. And for the next 10 years, from 1991 until 2000, I served in the basically the individual ready reserve. And then it was just after 2000 that I put in my retirement package to retire in 2002 that 9/11 happened in 2001. I was able to get reactivated, go through all the kind of the training, achieve the MOS, and then deploy with the 5th Civil Affairs Group. And so with my team, we got into Ramadi, and we had agreed with the local Iraqis to live outside the wire 6 days a week, have a presence right downtown in the ramshackle government center building, just so that we would have that presence and work with them. This was an event where one of the things I witnessed was the safeguarding of Iraqi women who were assigned to the provincial council in Ramadi, and it was the first time they ever had a chance to vote in their life. And I never forget these 7 women in the back of the room being able to raise their hand and vote, and then go up to a voting box and vote. But when I contrast that to the Marines that were killed in action, providing security for that event and security for those events at the government center in Ramadi, Corporal Kelly Cannon and Lance Corporal Marty Mortensen were a part of that. And both these Marines were killed in action on 20 April 2005. And so it's a day I'll never forget. And I think about the sacrifice they made being Marines, and the fact that, we're making a change in a community where women had the first time they ever had a chance to vote. These Marines are giving their all to provide security in that setting. It's on one hand, it's hard to reconcile, but they were there to provide that security and made a difference. And they gave their life for the freedom of others. So freedom, when I think about the sense of freedom, we talk about the right to vote and about being free in America. And when I saw people who had lived under a dictatorship and were trying to figure out what to do with their newfound freedom in the midst of an insurgency, then I think about Marines who were getting wounded and dying to provide that, became really real. Following that, I recall when we were on our convoy coming into the center, and we incurred an IED attack. Was able to effect the medevac with the lieutenant colonel, and the lance corporal got him out to the battalion aid station, and then got him on helicopters and medevaced out. And then following that deployment in Iraq, we went back to Kuwait, waiting for redeployment back to the U.S. We spent a week in Kuwait at Camp Arafjan, and that's where I ran into the Red Cross, and they had a center set up where we could go in and decompress, contact home, and begin to get ready to fly back to the U.S. So with regards to my son His name is Second Lieutenant Travis M. Jordan. He was in the U.S. Air Force, and amazing young man. A real heart towards giving and volunteer work in high school. He had established this Best Buddies program, connecting disadvantaged kids if they have Down syndrome, autism, and then pairing them with kids who don't have that particular situation. Then he went on to college, and he got an ROTC full ride scholarship. So after 4 years, he was commissioned as a second lieutenant. He had initially enlisted in the reserves as an E1. He was commissioned as a second lieutenant, but then and he was assigned to MacDill Air Force Base. But we learned that Travis was struggling with his mental health and depression, and Travis took his life. And when the chaplain and the commanding officer showed up to our door and made their call to us here in California, it was easily the worst day of my life and my wife's life. One of the things that Lynn and I and my other son Connor decided, that this kind of experience could either destroy us, or it could define us, or it would strengthen us. And so we thought, based on Travis, who was such a wonderful human being, very warm, that to honor him appropriately, I think he would want it for us to strengthen us. And that mental health, like physical health, you got to take care of yourself, because something minor can become major. And so when you hear the comments about 22 veterans or active duty take their life a day, it's not just a random statistic in our family, it's real. And so it became very real for us. And that happened in 2016, May 5th. And then in 2017, the Red Cross, shared with me that the site in Camp Arafjan was pretty worn out. They came and said, why don't we honor your son's name and memory and do a fundraiser, refurbish this, and we'll call it a resiliency center, because we have a lot of troops that are struggling with mental health. We wholeheartedly embraced that. And then 2017, a year later, my other son and I, Connor, flew out to Kuwait with our senior vice president of Service the Armed Forces, who's also an Iraqi veteran, Kobe Langley. And we refurbished the center and created a healing arts center within this site. And then Kristen did and had a big ribbon cutting ceremony, and then we talked about mental health. And it's incredibly meaningful to me, because the last time I'd been through there was 2005, after my last combat deployment to Iraq, never thinking that I'd be returning years later and honoring my son's name, but that's what we did. And so once again, the Red Cross, what an incredibly meaningful way to honor Travis's name and honor his service, and to also start the conversation about mental health and how important it is we got to watch out for each other.